Well, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to Exceptionally Average, the podcast. I'm Craig.
I'm Steve.
We are happy to be back with you. Today is an exciting topic for us because they're both our passion projects. We're going to ask the question, or maybe make the statement, why you should write a book.
Yeah, and we're going to try to do it convincingly, right?
Yeah, try and add value, because we both are authors, self-published. So let's be honest, that's a thing.
It counts.
Yeah, but it counts. So we've both written a book, and we thought, hey, there's a lot of people, after you write a book, the amount of people that come up and say, hey, I've always wanted to write a book, but I have no idea how. Well, let Steve and I stumble, bumbles, and failures in success, hopefully.
Yeah, I would think.
Maybe be that. But I wanted to ask you before we get going, it's been a few weeks. We did our 3-week series on physical, emotional, spiritual health. It seemed to add value to a lot of people. Several people listened. It was encouraging to me. But we've been off for about a month. We haven't had a new episode. That's because it's been crazy in the summer. You've had some pretty big family things happen. Why don't you share it with the listeners?
Yes, certainly. So my daughter, my oldest child, got married about a month ago, and so there were preparation and worries and excitement surrounding that. Yeah. And so we got through that, and we just had an absolute ball. We're so happy for her, blessed by not just her marriage, but the son-in-law that we have acquired as our own
awesome
son.
guy.
So it's just fantastic. You were a huge part of that. Thank you for being the pastor who facilitated that.
That was an
Hopefully
awesome
you enjoyed
one.
it as well.
Yeah.
You had an entirely different perspective than I did.
My favorite perspective.
Yes.
I get to stand there with the groom while everyone's watching the bride, come down the aisle, and I get to hang out with the groom. And your son made a very stupid bet beforehand, because your son-in-law is an awesome dude, but I pegged him. He's an emotional cat.
Absolutely.
And nothing wrong with that.
Wears it on his sleeve.
And your son was like, oh, he's not going to cry. And I'm like, dude's definitely crying. And I was standing next to him. We definitely had tears.
Definitely. So we won that bet. You and I are the kind of people that when we make a bet, we're pretty certain we're not going to lose.
No, I don't lose at anything.
We don't lose ever, right? We're the people that can land 747s
exactly.
if we have to. So it was one of those easy wins for us. Mm-hmm. But so we got through the wedding, had a great time. Then my wife and I prepared for a getaway, vacation, summertime and 4th of July. And we just had, we're just finally starting to settle in for the summer, and it's about half over.
It's about over. Yeah, that's what we were on vacation as a family. I haven't preached at our church in 4 weeks. I took a summer preaching sabbatical. I did that last summer, did it again just as a way to refresh my mind. And,
sure.
And so what's funny is I thought we would record a lot more over the summer because it seems almost less busy, but because it becomes unstructured time, it really isn't less busy because you're going here and there and different things. So I'd like to think the podcast will become more regular as we move into the fall, because it's actually a little bit easier for you and I to just schedule the time to record.
And I don't know about your family, but other families that I've talked to, ours included, we always have done so much better with structure. Mm-hmm. So when the school year starts, even though it's busier, we can plan at least, and we understand that structure and that flow. So this would be a great time for us to kind of get some more podcasts under our belt. Hopefully let the listeners chime in and
get
if
they
some momentum.
If they have anything that if you want us to talk about, a goal of ours is to try and add value to the listener always. We want to talk through things. We see things differently. We want to try and talk about really faith, family, fatherhood, and all sorts of different things. I want to sometime get your thoughts on being in the business world for decades, because I know we have some listeners that are in that world, and it's a tough world to be a Christian in, and sometimes, but also succeed in. But today is about our babies. For those watching on camera, we have not our actual babies, and no offense to them, but the ones that have never let us down.
That's right. The ones that are always by our side.
Yeah.
And we can reference anytime we want to. But you and I both, you mentioned, we're authors, and there's a certain ring to that, right? Mm-hmm. When we say that out loud. And honestly, after I had written this, I had a very difficult time saying I am an author.
Yeah, there's a bit of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it felt almost a little uncomfortable for me and awkward. I'm certainly getting a little more used to it now, but It was a bucket list for me. It was a bucket list for you.
Yeah, why don't you tell the listeners, okay, they are just listening in. They didn't know either of us wrote a book. What's your book about? And maybe just give a little synopsis, but then tell me, why did you write Rain? What's the book about? And then why did you write it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the title of my book is Rain Falls Down, and it's Rain, R-E-I-G-N, not your typical rain as in water droplets. However, rain, R-E-I-G-N, does fall down if in the Christian value, right? So I'll give you a little background of why I wrote a book. Number one, I've always considered myself a pretty decent writer and somebody who, a thinker of things. You know, I think about things a lot. I grew up as an only child in the country, so I spent a lot of time by myself. And when you're by yourself, you have conversations with yourself. And that's exactly what I did. My kids make fun of me to this day that I talk to myself out loud and have real conversations. But in doing so, it really helped me think through things much more effectively and generate not just enthusiasm and critical thinking, but also clarity. And so I had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to write a book all these years. I was standing in a bookstore in Lima, and the mall isn't even there anymore, and everybody probably knows what it is who lives locally. I was standing there, I'm looking for a book, something that is I always like the self-improvement books that are non-fictional, something you can learn from, something you can glean. And I couldn't find anything, nothing. And I said, screw it, I'm going to write my own book. That is how it happened.
Yeah.
That moment. I went home, and I was working in another profession at the time.
So this is a while ago. What year would this have been?
This was 2013.
Okay, so almost a decade ago.
Almost now, yeah. So, and I started getting thoughts down on paper. And you know, Craig, the hardest thing to do is not just to write the first page or the first chapter. The hardest thing to do is to write the first sentence.
Yeah.
But once you write the first sentence, the second sentence gets a little bit easier, and the sentence after that. Before you know it, you have a paragraph. Before you know it, you have a page. And all of a sudden, things just start clicking, and you're on a roll.
So you write Rain because you didn't feel like the book you wanted to see was on the shelf. Am I correct in hearing you in that?
There is some truth to that. I wrote Rain because as much as I tout it as a fictional story, there's a lot of we write about things we know, right? We write about things that we experience.
Yeah, it was therapy.
It was very therapeutic. And so all these thoughts that I mentioned earlier that float around in my head that I can never remember the next day. You know, you wake up the next morning like, oh, I'm going to remember that, and you don't. Now, because you have it down in book form, you can go back and you can reference it. You have your thoughts down on paper, and you can always go back to it. And so I wanted that. I wanted to become something that so many people talk about, but they don't do. I wanted to do something hard. And it's something that I've adopted, especially over the last probably 5 to 6 years, is doing hard things. I talk about that in my own podcast or on my own program, Finish Strong.
Yep.
Let's do hard things. It focuses on, not just a nutritional health journey, a weight loss journey, but also mental improvement. But doing hard things, writing a book is very difficult. And so I wanted to accept that challenge and be able to find that discipline in myself to do hard things. So that's what I did. And the book is quite simply, it follows some truth surrounding my life. It's about a small family, but it also takes on a little bit of a twist with, I would call it a spiritual crime drama. But it's
unique.
It finishes with a realization of understanding yourself, understanding your relationship with Christ, understanding your responsibility, the responsibility that God places on you as a husband, as a father, as a Christian man in your community. And that was what I wanted to write about. And I wanted to see if I could do it. I wanted to do something hard. So that's my story. Yeah. And it follows this small family with a new a new couple just basically married, about to have a child, and the father in the story gets caught up in his business world and defines success a little bit differently than what you and I might define it, and it becomes about money, and you get a little bit sideways sometimes when it comes to that, and you know, the law steps in, the FBI steps in, and all of a sudden now you've got this issue going on that doesn't just affect the individual being pursued, it affects the entire family. And how do those dynamics play? And one of the most rewarding things for me, and I'll make this quick, is once the story was written, I couldn't believe that wasn't the only reward. You know, I thought, I wrote a book. I have it published. That's rewarding in itself. What was more rewarding to me were the people that came to me saying, I can't believe how much your story reflects my personal life. And that in and of itself, the individuals that wanted to sit down with me and share their story and pour themselves out to me in Christian brother love, and just, it was overwhelming and so rewarding and such a blessing in my life. And so this book has blessed me in so many different ways that I couldn't have even imagined from the start. You probably experienced much of the same thing. I mean, you have your own story.
Yeah. In some ways, it kind of came similar to yours in that it was a long time thought and journey. A lot of pastors, we write for a living. You know, I write 3,000 words every week. Some are good, some are bad, some are somewhere in between. But it's definitely, I think it was 2017, I gave a sermon on Psalm 23, as a pastor is one to do. It's maybe one of the most famous passages of Scripture. If you've gone to Grandma's funeral, you've heard it. If you've listened to Coolio, you've heard it. You know, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comforts me, is Psalm 23:4. So that's just one verse of a 6-verse psalm, but it's perhaps maybe the most famous verse of the Bible. John 3:16, right. Psalm 23:4.
You see it at all the football games.
Yep. So it's up there. And so I gave a sermon on Psalm 23, and someone in passing in the church said, "Man, that was a really good sermon. I wish you had more time. It almost would make a good book." And I just had this thought, like, you know, what you can say in a half-hour sermon, boy, it would make a good book. And I kind of, like you, I'm like, I would like to write that. Like, I'd like to write a book. I'd like to try that. And in my profession, it's not so far off the beaten trail that it's something I'd have to only work on in off hours or something. I can make it a part of my life because this for the church. So that's how this guy came about. It's called "Who is Your Shepherd? A Pastoral Look at Psalm 23," and it is in some ways kind of what you did. I wrote a book for my people, and what I mean by that is my people are state line people. State Line Collective is near the state line. It is rural. It is predominantly blue collar. I would say very high school educated, incredibly well-reasoned and logical, but not a ton of college education. Unless you're a teacher or a profession that does it. I mean, folks were coming out here, they were going and making great money at the factory. They just weren't going to college, and they're still doing that and doing wonderful. But smart folks, but they're not going to wade through 30, 40-page chapters. You know, it's almost like a just cut to the chase kind of culture. Well, if you've read a lot of Christian books, and I know you've read some, I've obviously read a ton. There's sometimes where it just feels like the author's writing just to make themselves. It's like, geez, oh, Pete, dude, get to the point. You like, how many anecdotes, how many scriptures do you need to unpack here? So I thought, what if I wrote what I called a Mercer County man book, where a guy could sit down and read this with a high school education, who doesn't read a lot, but loves the Lord, wants to get some value in his life, wants to extract something from scriptures and think differently about God, or have his thoughts or affections stirred. So that's why I started writing it. It took me probably 3 or 4 years. 1 year once I got serious, but you know, there was starts and stops and fits, and maybe that would be a good place to kind of, I want to ask you a few questions, but maybe the first thing we could both share is, how long did it take you to actually write Rain? Because you had it different where you weren't writing on the clock, But then something happened in your life that opened up some time. Yeah. So how long did it take you to write Rain, and what finally got you over the hump? And then maybe I'll share the same.
Yeah, I have two answers to that question. I appreciate that. So the actual writing time, probably sitting butt in seat in front of a computer, I would say took probably 7-8 months. And that was intensive from, maybe 8 o'clock in the morning till 1 in the afternoon.
Do you know how many words Rain is?
Yeah, I used to.
Or pages?
It's 256 pages, I believe.
So maybe 30,000?
Yeah, it's actually 74. It's actually 68 or 69,000 words. Yeah. So it was.
For perspective, Shepherd's about 20.
Yeah.
So it's about 3 times that.
Yeah, it is. And so those 7 months include, I recall that now, about 68,000 words, and which puts it just over the mark for being a small novel, right?
Yeah.
So
it's decent
great.
Size.
And I didn't have hey, I want to write a book this long when I started. That wasn't my intention.
Story.
I just wanted to tell a story, my story. And I kind of let the cat out of the bag when I say that it's my story, and it mostly is. I don't run from that for people who ask. And so the book itself really was just so therapeutic for me, and I just wanted to be able to get something down. But the timeline, the 7 months of actual writing, does not coincide with the actual time that it took me to write the book.
7 months over 4 years, 5 years?
I started in 2013.
So
I finished it and published it in 2021. Yeah. So what happened was I got 20 chapters written by 2015. Great. Then COVID hit. I'm sorry. Then I took a new job. So then for 5 years, nearly 5 years, the book sat idle. And it didn't just sit idle because I took a new job. I need to be honest. It took a hiatus because I struggled with the ending, because the ending was so personal to me. And I wanted to hear God. I wanted to hear that voice help me write that. I wasn't going to be able to do that on my own in a silo. And I needed to get it right. And it was truly a God thing for me. And I know a lot of people don't agree with me, and they're going to cringe and they're going to dislike what I'm about to say. But 2020 with COVID, for me personally, as it helped me develop, was a blessing for me. I was put on leave of absence.
Got laid off.
Got laid off.
Because of COVID, not because of character issues.
Right, not because of character issues. No. But I was off for 3 months. And I said, I looked at the book and I thought, I need to do something. And
you're not one to sit around.
No, I can't just sit around.
Yeah.
And so I prayed hard about it. And a week later, after I got laid off, I said, okay, I'm listening. I'm ready, God. You take the pen, and together we'll write this ending. And so that's what happened. I took the next 3 months and finished the book. Then I took the following 3 months and edited the book with me and others and me again. I probably read the book like
way too
10
many
times before I turned it over, and others read it the same. So that time, 2013 to publish in 2021, November of 2021 at that, it's a long time.
Yeah.
That's my timeline. Yeah. How about you?
Started in 17, did all my chapter outlines, was feeling really good, let it sit for a year, came back in like 18. Okay, now I'm really going to do it. Never mind, not gonna. And in the meantime, it was easy for me to keep putting it off. And we'll talk about this in the next thing I want to ask you of one of my struggles, because it's a deeply personal thing to write and put yourself out there. And you got to do some mental battles and I think people will understand that. It sounds like, oh, you're hyping it up, but I'll share a little bit more later on that. But I kept struggling with getting going and writing, and I'm pretty critical of myself. I expect excellence out of myself, and so I'm one to call my writing crap really quick. So if I write crap, I'm not going to put that out there. I want to be proud of what I do, and so I'd write couple chapters and I'd be like, oh, those are garbage. What value did they add? I say that a lot, but I think about that. Like if someone's going to read your book, in value, by the way, can be entertainment. It can be anything, but I'm trying to add Christian value. And it's like, well, did that do anything? So I got to 2020 and I finally got serious. I talked with the elders here at the church. I said, hey, January 2020, I'm going to take a sabbatical. I'm going to take 4 weeks off of work and literally move my office to my house and write from my bedroom. And I'm going to write this book. They're like, cool, do it in July. No one's around. Church life, vacations, all that stuff. And we're excited. The church will pay you time off. We're basically writing this book for the church. It'll be an awesome thing for our church body. Super supportive. Well, 2020 hits and it's like, hey, maybe a sabbatical's not the right time now. I'm having to figure out how to be, Joel Osteen, not in preaching, but in televangelist. We've got to go live stream. We've got to do all this stuff with COVID and try and keep our church afloat and just do that. So book again gets put off. 2021 comes around and we drew a line in the sand and we're like, hey, this project needs to happen. So I took a sabbatical. The book's 11 chapters and I probably had 3 or 4 that I was happy with going into the sabbatical June of 2021. Wrote the entire thing over the next 4 weeks. So I wrote the rest of it. I had good chapter outlines. So I'm a big outline person. I need to know where I'm going. If I sit down just to try and vamp, it's not going to go well. If I think through my outlines, and specifically when you're talking about scripture, you want to make sure you're not just vamping on the things of the Lord. It's like, no, if I'm going to say something and then people from my church are going to read it with a level of pastoral authority, it needs to be on. So I had good outlines, but I sat down in the next 4 weeks and finished writing it. Then my editing took way longer than I would have thought. And that's not because it took that long. It only took 6-8 weeks. I thought it was going to be a quick spell check. But one of the best things I did, God's gift to this project, was a woman by the name of Christina Yanega, a friend of mine from my previous church, and I knew she was a creative writing major. And I thought, I think she does book editing. I'll reach out to her. And again, when I'm thinking book editing, I'm thinking spell check. She brought so much more to the table, and she'd push me on things. She'd say things like, you asked 3 questions at the beginning of the chapter. You answered 1, and you gave 2 other answers that you didn't even ask the question of, what's this chapter about? Which, I'll be honest, bruised my ego something fierce. What do you mean it wasn't great? That kind of thing. Man, she made the book so much better. She was a pastor's kid, and she'd be like, I've heard pastors say this my whole life. What does that even mean? You pastors say do this, this, and this, because I'm writing about spiritual things. And she's like, I don't even get that. You've got to flesh it out. And then she really pushed me. She's like, this is not a sermon. This is a one-way dialogue. You need to set up the shop and tear down the shop in 1 week. Where a sermon, I might be in a series and be like, hey, come back next week. I'm going to finish some of these thoughts. These are ongoing. These are, a book is one way. They have it, and then they may never interact with you again. So the editing process took a longer time than I would have thought. It's an 89-page book, and there was, it's something like 692 edits or something like that. So spelling and grammar was a problem, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But so overall, I'd say actual writing time, it took me a good 3-4 months. Mm-hmm. But then again, you spread out. So it seems actually with length, we were about in the same. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you, because I think this is the biggest thing, we'll talk later on about how to publish, because I think that'll help people think through, but how you can watch some great YouTube videos and figure out pretty quickly how to publish a book. I think the biggest thing is fears. Mm-hmm. So what was the scariest thing for you, or what was the hardest part for you in writing Rain?
Yeah, the hardest part for me was, since it was a nonfiction for the most part, was trying to allow myself to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Because so much of a book, and I realized this really early on, for a relatively true story, or even a fictional story, but especially for a true story, the book is made up of many small short stories that when put in a specific order, flow naturally and tell the big picture. So what I was doing was I was writing a number of small little stories and anecdotes and tidbits and things that I remember, moments and how I felt, and trying to go back to that moment. And when you do that, I get goosebumps even talking about it right now, because you immediately put yourself in a position that you tried so hard to move away from.
Yeah. Now tried to bury it some a little.
Now you have to go revisit that moment, and you have to remind yourself how you felt in that moment. And now you don't only just remember it, you have to document it. Mm-hmm. There were moments I sat in complete struggle because I didn't want to put it down on paper, because as soon as you do, guess what? It becomes real.
Yeah.
And that was my struggle.
Well, and then other people get to interpret it too.
They do.
Because it's not a private journal.
Right.
Like, you're putting this work out for people.
That's right.
I could see that. Yeah.
So that vulnerability, and then allowing it to become so real.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people will relate with that, because I'm sure there's people that want to tell their story, but they're like, I can't tell my story. I can't put that out there.
And that was the whole blessing that came back to me in full circle that I mentioned earlier is, I'm going to put this out here. I'm ready to do it. I'm ready to let people know my background, let people know who I am. And I'm going to lay myself on the ground and let people judge me, because that's ultimately what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And now, what are they going to do with that information? How are they going to come back? How is it going to be received? And honestly, that was a very difficult moment for my wife as well, because she lived it with me. Mm-hmm. And
because it's her story.
It was her story too.
Yeah.
And she is heavily involved. She's, there's main characters here, right? Yeah. You write about what you know and what you experience. And so that vulnerability was extremely painful. And that's what made the ending honestly so difficult, because I needed to tie that loop, and I needed to have it mean something to me, that I wasn't just doing it in a vacuum to write words down on a paper, because honestly, the last 3 or 4 chapters, without those 3 or 4 chapters, without me meeting God in the middle, or me going to him, he doesn't mean, you know what I mean? Meeting him in that moment in time that I needed to meet him, the first 30 chapters would have meant nothing. Mm-hmm. It meant nothing. All that work that I did would have meant zero if I didn't capture those 3 or 4 chapters at the end. But those 3 or 4 chapters at the end, they hurt.
Yeah.
They were painful to write, and I struggled, and there were tears, and there was prayerful moments, and it was momentous for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super helpful, because I think a lot of people will feel that way if they're writing autobiographical, if they're telling a fiction story that plays a little close to home. Mm-hmm. Mine is very different. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure it's a struggle most writers. Maybe it is. It's maybe there's probably a lot of people like me, built like me, who will just be like, well, I can't write a book. And the reason I say that is my biggest fear and anxiety was the actual writing, the English language.
Okay.
Because I'm an IEP kid. I had all my state tests read to me. I mean, the state of Ohio looked at Craig Flack educationally and said, to give this kid a fair shake, we need to take a Jill Harris, Steve's wife, and set them in the hallway, and Jill's going to read the test. I mean, that's like what your wife would do. She works with kids like me.
That's right.
And we're going to give him independent educational aids that, like, we'll give him extra time on all his tests. We'll give him all extra time on his homework. He'll have to go to remedial English classes. I did that through high school. And so it didn't make sense. The reason I'm a good communicator is I don't have to turn in my transcripts to anyone. But if someone read them, and you've seen some of my PowerPoint slides and said, there's some grammar errors, your ways things could be, but I can talk. Mm-hmm. Writing, in my editor, Christina, would remind me, the English language has words.
Right.
You can't just keep writing in incomplete sentences. I think half the book was like one sentence,
So if I can just, I want to take a deeper dive into that. You showed your vulnerability through putting words down on paper and hoping that that message that you're trying to send out is received the way you want it to be received.
Mm-hmm. I think that, but even that, I had a lot of, when you grow up, going to the dumb kid class, because that's what your friends call it, you believe, well, I'm a dumb kid. Like, and again, I don't say that like, oh, boohoo, Craig. I have a big ego. Don't worry about me. Like, I didn't like look and be like, I'm good at other things. Some people are brainy. Some people are sports. Some people are this. I'm gifted at communicating. Most people couldn't stand up and talk in front of hundreds of people and keep their attention. I'm good at it. And so I look and I'm like, oh, I'm gifted at different things. But then all of a sudden it's like, well, how about you wade into that thing you're really not gifted at? So that's actually one of the reasons why I say Christine is such a big gift to the book, because she is gifted at it. So God gave me people as a part of this project that could come alongside where I'm weak, admittedly, and I just had to be humble enough to listen and work with and hear from. But yeah, it was difficult to think of like, okay, how are you going to write a book? You're going to have more grammar errors. You're going to have more of this, that. And it's just that putting that vulnerability and working through that. And I thought more about my educational background last year writing this than I had. Like you said, it was therapy. And my wife was very good in school. And so she couldn't relate with a lot of it. And I'm like, you just don't know what it's like having to stand up in front of your peers for 7 grades. And while they get to do normal class, English and language arts specifically, you have to go to the glorified mop closet because it's the 90s and like inclusive learning environments weren't a thing then. And you have to have your tests read to you, and you're different educationally. I remember taking a writing class in college, and I'd always get them back, and they'd just bleed red for spelling and grammar. And I had this British teacher, and I always remember her because I had to meet with her, and she said, "Craig," in her British accent, which I won't try and fake, she said, "Craig, you should take more writing classes. You're a gifted writer." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm going to get a B-, like C+ in your class." And she said, "Yeah, that's
working your butt off."
Yeah, she's like, "But that's because of grammar and stuff like that. Your storytelling is actually really good." And I'm like, then I should get more than a B-. And I looked at her and I told her, I said, "I think it's pretty ridiculous that you just told me I'm a good writer and the best I'm going to get in your class is a B-." She's like, "Well, grammar's a part of writing and you can grow in that." I'm 35. I'm probably tapped out on where I'm going to grow. My educational abilities, I'm good, better now. I know what TO and TOO mean. I got the thens and then, there. I've got some of those figured out, but you asked me what a comma splice is.
Oh my gosh.
Or that
we
kind
can't
of
even
stuff.
talk about commas.
Like, I just put them in on
Me too.
feel. Like, if I feel like it, and Christina would be like, "Why'd you put a comma there?" And I'm like, "I don't know. It just felt like a comma." And she's like, "That's not how that works." And I'm like, "I don't know. It's like adding salt to a dish."
I went back and forth with my editor also. I apologize.
Oh, sure.
Sorry about the comma issue. I don't know. I don't get commas. I don't understand them. And she goes, "Nobody does."
No, and it's like, clearly. But that was my biggest struggle. And so I say that and I share that as and I really mean this. I've heard a million people say, "If I can do it, you can do it." But truly, I mean, if you hear some of my educational background, I think most people are like, "I wouldn't have thought that with you." Like, most people would hear that because I project a pretty confident, and I am a pretty confident guy. But I have a huge deficit in my educational ability. What takes one person, 2 read-throughs will take me 12. It just is what it is. So in some ways, I wrote this book for people like me. So if someone picked up a copy of my book too, they're going to find it very conversational and reader-friendly. And there's a reason for that, because I'm not an academic. And so most Christian works are written by brilliant men and women. And I don't say this as a self-deprecating. I mean it true. I'm not brilliant, and I wasn't trying to offer brilliant things. I was trying to offer good biblical wisdom to godly folks that just need a shot in the arm and to know that the Lord loves them, he's with them, and to unpack Psalm 23 for them.
So let me ask you a question and throw this out there to you. We've talked about our experience, and people are probably listening like, wow, that's pretty interesting that you guys were both able to do this because you came from different perspectives. You're both different generation, right? You're younger than I am by a few years. What is the reason we would say that the folks that are listening, why should they write a book? Yeah. What's the value in it for them? What do they glean from it? What if you had to pick 3 or 4 things?
This is going to sound super cheesy. And maybe it is, but I believe it. I think everyone has a story to tell.
I agree with that.
And so, I know that sounds like tell your story. Tell your story, man. Mm-hmm. We live in a golden age. And I think everyone had a story to tell for a long time. I'm a history major, so I thrive on stories, and I thrive on, the Civil War letters between a little-known private and his mom back home and that kind of stuff. And he's telling a story, and you think, who was this guy that died at Gettysburg? And he was 19, and he died for the Union, and this is his life, and this is his story. I think everyone has a story to tell, and partnering with that, you almost don't have an excuse in 2022 to not tell it because of how accessible publishing is. And we'll end later on with just talking a little bit, giving some tips and tricks in that. But I really think the biggest reason they should write a book, and if they've made it this far in the podcast, they've probably thought about it, is because the world needs your story. And it might be about something that I would find no interest in and maybe not even read. You want to tell the story about how cosmetology changed your life, and I might say, hey, that's awesome, just not for me. But there's someone in your sphere of influence and circle that needs it. The other thing, the reason I think people need to write their book is they need to stop worrying about its commercial success and start realizing how it can impact those around them. So both of us, I've probably got about 1,000 copies of my book out there. You're probably somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
Those aren't commercial barn burners.
No, they're not.
Our family and our friends in our community have read it. And
we hit them up early.
And that's great. They needed that story. And it was helpful for them. There was a gentleman, I won't say his name because I just don't want to share it, because he came up to me, and at the end, some of my insecurity, I didn't even realize it snuck through. And in the conclusion of my book, I said something that I wish I wouldn't have, because it was insecure, and I wish I would have given God more credit. I said, I don't know that I've written anything in this book that's overly profound or that anyone will get anything out of it. Those are the inside thoughts that you think while writing it, and one of mine snuck through onto the pages, and I didn't even realize I really wrote it. And a gentleman, older gentleman, probably in his 70s, came up to me and said, Craig, I haven't really read many books in my life, but I read your book. And I wish you wouldn't have said that, because it meant a lot to me. And the things you said helped me a lot. And it was one of the most encouraging comments I could have ever gotten. And I really thought, if it was just for him, it was worth it. Because if it drew him closer to the Lord, it drew me closer to the Lord. Well, hey, if it's for the two of us, that's worth it. And so I say that as a way of, why should you write your book? There might be one person that needs to hear your story. It'll benefit you. It'll be a labor of love, and it'll be this thing. It's as close as you and I will come to having a baby, like of incubating this thing and laboring over it. Not comparing it, sweetie. Don't write the show. But
by the way, we are the HR people as well, so it's just going to fall on deaf ears.
But there might be someone, write a book because someone needs to hear your story.
Yeah.
So you need to you've got a story to tell. Someone needs to hear your story, and it is so accessible in this day and age to do it. What about you? If someone came up and said, Steve, why should I write a book? Oh, great author.
Yeah.
Why?
I think probably the number one answer that I would give is because you don't know yourself as well as you think you do.
Do some therapy, essentially.
It is. And, it doesn't matter what kind of book you write. I'm sure you learned an awful lot through leaps and bounds from the time you wrote chapter 1 to the time you finished your 90 pages.
It's the process.
The process. And I'm willing to bet you believe you became a better person, that you became a more deep thinker, probably more deeply rooted in God, even though you're already a pastor and you don't think, hey, that's not possible. But I'm guessing you took leaps and bounds.
I cried when my book showed up. I didn't realize how meaningful
emotional.
it was. It showed up, and I held it in my hand, and I actually broke down in tears.
And you're not a crier.
And I'm not a crier, and
Right.
I didn't expect that. And my wife was just like, whoa. It was that moving of a thing. Short of my children, it's the thing I'm most proud of in my entire life.
Yeah. So I think you learned something about yourself that you maybe aren't willing to admit, that you've never investigated. You've never taken that dirt road before. That's always just a little bit harder. And you're going to learn a lot about yourself. There's two other things that are important through this too. And it relates back to God, and for me anyway, and I'm sure you, there's a discipline to writing a book where you have to set aside time where you could be doing other things that are maybe more fun. That
Almost
are
certainly more fun.
And a lot easier.
Yep.
And so the discipline of parking your butt in front of your computer and say, okay, from this time, for me, it was from 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock, I am going to write. Now, there were times that from 10 o'clock to 11:30, I just kind of stared at a blank page, but it was also in prayerful moments like, what do you want?
Yeah.
What do you need me to say? And trying to really capture too my feeling, go back to that moment in time, how I felt, how I reacted, how I influenced others by my reactions. And so that was extremely important for me. But the discipline of being able to sit down and write was something that I learned and developed.
Yeah.
And so you talk about, hey, I want to be motivated. I don't believe in motivation. I think motivation lasts 3 days, 7 days the most. I mean, ask anybody who started a diet on January 1st.
Yeah.
Motivation is short-lived, and motivation is for rookies. It's for people who aren't serious. Discipline, on the other hand, that's for people who are serious, because discipline requires doing things you don't want to do anyway.
That'd be a good T-shirt.
Yeah, that would be.
Side note.
That would be. In the
Verbal trademark, State Line Collective.
That's right. Circle T. The third thing, and I mentioned it earlier, is I have learned to love to do hard things. I want to do things that others aren't willing to do, just because that makes us unique.
Isn't that, like, again, this is where you and I are so wired the same. It's why we get along so well. To me, that's what makes life worth living.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to look back at my life and be like, they didn't do anything remarkable.
Right.
Like, that just breaks my heart. Yeah. That it'd be like, you'd look back on your life and be like, I don't know, I coasted a lot.
Right.
It's like be remarkable, do hard things. And again, that's not because this book has sold 1 million copies.
No.
It was the process of doing
That's
it.
right.
It was the thing.
It was the discipline of doing it.
Yeah.
And, I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm all wet, but I don't think so. As a matter of fact, I know so. I know for a fact it was pleasing to God. I know I did this for him, and I did it for the right reasons. And the reason I know that is because I put myself out there. I made myself vulnerable. I don't do that because I like getting run over by a bus over and over again. I did it because I felt like others had to hear this story. There was somebody that God was leading me to. And again, that came full circle to me. People came to me day after day. I got emails, I got phone calls. I had texts of people wanting to meet with me and sit down at a picnic table in the park and just tell their story while they sobbed. And it was amazing. It was amazing. And the whole time I'm feeling for these individuals, but I'm also like, thank you, God. Thank you for choosing me. And thank you for making me feel comfortable being vulnerable. And I think 2020 taught us that, right? It had a big part of that. So those are the reasons why I want people to write a book. Yeah, go ahead and tell your story, but think of the deeper meaning. Find your why.
Yeah.
Find your why. And when you do that, you're going to learn a lot about yourself. And it's a big, scary thing, but you're going to be better for it.
Okay. As we wrap up, Why don't you talk a little bit about, just briefly about, I think it was called BookBaby is what you used.
That's right. I use BookBaby out of New Jersey.
So tell how you took your Microsoft Word doc and got a printed actual book that's in bookstores or available for print. How did that happen? What did you do?
Boy, it was scary when you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I called people who had published a book before. I called people who had publishers, like real book authors, you know?
Yeah. We're the little leaguers. You called the major leaguers.
People who make money.
Yeah.
And I called those who published their own books and said, who did you use? And based on that, the feedback that I got, it kept coming back to me, the BookBaby, and it's a publisher out of New Jersey. So I contacted them and I said, hey, look, I have no clue what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I don't even know what questions to ask you, but I have these words on a Microsoft document. What do I do with them?
I give you give book. Like, yeah.
That's right. Right. And they're like, you are not the first one to tell us this. As a matter of fact, most of our customers have no clue how to publish a book. We will walk you through that. You just need to decide how deeply involved you want us to be. Do you want us to do the editing? I said, no, I've got an editor. Somebody's going to help me kind of put this thing together and make sure it's good. Like, okay, great. They said, do you have somebody who's going to make your cover? I said, you know what? As a matter of fact, I do. So I have a friend who's going to design the cover for me. And so they're like, you're halfway there. Mm-hmm. And they said, here's what you need to do. You just need to, we're going to create an account for you. They walked me through that. So just this, hey, send an email, get a password. Yeah. You have an account. There you are. And then you go through this checklist of the things that you do want them to do and that you don't need them to do. And based on that, all I needed to do was upload the cover that my friend had provided for me. And it's Claudia Sebastiani. She did a fantastic job. I'm so pleased with it. Nailed it. And then my editor, Amy Nelson, did a fantastic job. BG grad. It was very hard for me, but nice. BG grad.
That's why I knew your book wasn't terrible.
That's right. BG grad.
It overcame
with a journalist background and a English major. Yeah, so I knew I had to have her included. Yeah. And then just, hey, they said, upload it to this account. And here's the fee. Here's what it's going to cost, and we'll do the rest.
What it cost? Was it $1,000, $1,500 or so?
I think I paid $1,800. Okay, yeah. But I did it because it's also based on word count.
Yeah, it's not a small book.
It's not a small book. And then the few things that I asked them to do along with that.
Well, yeah, and you're picking the services you want. So
that's right.
But just so people kind of know, because sometimes those websites don't share
pricing.
It is a
buffet table.
Yeah.
And they make it so easy. And I'm sure BookBaby isn't the only one out there that does this for you, because let's face it, there are more first-time authors than there are repeat authors.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no doubt. So there are companies out there that have to cater to that market. Yep. And I'm one of them. You're one of them.
Yeah, that's what I went a different route. I decided to go Kindle self-publishing. Mm-hmm. So it is basically Amazon decided, hey, we're the largest bookseller in the world. What if we print books? And they will print your book on demand, which is crazy to me. But that's actually what BookBaby does as well. It's just, thank God for the technology we live in. But so what I did was I hired a company called eBook PBook, and I sent them my Word document. That was just a Microsoft Word document. And they sent me back a formatted document ready to upload into Amazon. So I want to say that was maybe $200 or something like that.
Okay.
And I picked a style. They had like 15 to pick from of what did I want my book to feel like? So what did I want the indentations to look like? What font did I want? That kind of thing. All that stuff. Yeah. And then they formatted it accordingly. They were great to work with. eBook PBook actually came recommended by Amazon. That's how I found them. Same thing. I had Miss Carrie Moeller, who did my cover design, which I absolutely love. Like you said, for yours, she is a dear friend of mine. So she designed my cover. I was like, I think I want like sheep or something, and I don't know, but I'm like, art is not my specialty. So she did that, and then I worked with Christina. So all in, I probably had around $1,200 or so. of editor fees and design fees and stuff. But then Amazon, you pay nothing. So same thing, you create a Kindle account. There's a ton of great walkthroughs on YouTube about these, but you upload your cover. It's got to be very specialized by their things, but any designer knows how to do it. It made me cross-eyed, but they had to have like I don't know. And it looks great. And then you upload the Word document, and then Amazon lets you do something really neat. They'll let you set your price. They'll tell you your margins. And then you can also order author copies at cost.
That's right.
So my book landed is $2.15 from Amazon because it's so small. Any bigger, and it would probably be in the 3 or 4s, just because it goes by how much ink it takes and pages and that kind of thing. I've got about the smallest possible book you can print. And so, $2 copies, that's nothing. Now I sell mine for I think it's like $5.99, and I think that was actually the lowest I could go because again, our projects were a little different in that I was paid to write mine. The church paid me. So the way I look at it is I was compensated to write this book. So if I can get it into people's hands, so we give it out free at our church and stuff like that because we want people to read it. But Amazon just makes it super, super easy. ebook Pbook also sent me back a Kindle version, so I was able to upload a Kindle version, and I think that's 99 cents. You actually can't give away a Kindle for free. I thought you could.
So your book is available here at the church. It's down in the lobby. People can pick it up and take it for free.
Yeah, so if anyone's in the State Line area, they're in Mercer County, All Glazed Dark, you can come pick it up. You can pick up multiple copies. I've had, we have a friend in the church who owns a business. They keep copies at their business, very flattering and humbling, but they give copies away to their customers. That we live in a pretty Christian area, but also there's just people that it's like they like free things.
Yes.
And so she's like, we put it out, and she's like, you just whoever God wants to give it to. So there's free copies here. So if someone wants to come pick up a copy, otherwise the only place it's available on the internets is Amazon.
You do have an audio version, am I right?
I do. So that was a cool story. Had an audiobook recorded, not by me because I can't read well. See earlier part of this podcast. But Miss Allison Bruns recorded because of the State Line Collective gear we have. Now, I just yesterday got done wrangling with Spotify. They have taken it off Spotify because it's technically not music. It's a spoken word, and that is not allowed because they pay. And I tried to say, I don't need paid. Just leave it on your platform. They won't do it. They'll put it up as a podcast, but they won't add it as I uploaded it as like a CD, like an album. So they took it off Spotify. So by the time this comes out, it'll be on YouTube. For people. So it'll be like a 2-hour YouTube video with chapter headings, and it'll just be one long audio recording. It's also on Apple Music. Apple Music allows it to be just fine. So it's free.
Didn't know that.
And so Spotify has a thing against it. But either way, again, it was just another thing. So it'll be on YouTube.
And Allison did a great job.
She did. She's, again, where God brings people to your team. People were like, why wouldn't you read your own book? And it's like, because I'm not a good reader. Right. They're like, well, you wrote the words. I'm like, I wrote them. If you ask me to read them back, I'm going to stumble and bumble through them because I'm not a good reader. My brain doesn't work like that. They're like, oh, so Allison's a wonderful reader. So why not have, and she was just like, I'll read it. And I was like, ha, ha, ha. And she's like, no, seriously, I'll read your book. I loved it and I want to read it. And I was like, all right. Yeah. So she did awesome. Where can people find your book if they're interested?
They can find it on Amazon. They can also find it through Barnes & Noble. Right. Book Baby, obviously, is another location. So it's not.
And if they contact you, do you have copies you can sell them?
I absolutely have copies that I can sell to them. And my book goes for $15.99 or $14.99. I can't remember which. And since I probably said $14.99, I'll sell it for $14.99.
Yeah.
Maybe less.
Yeah, find him on a good night. He'll give you a copy. If you come up and tell him, Steve, it meant so much to me. I need a copy. I don't have the money. He's going to give you one. He's going to sign it. I tell people always, they ask me to sign it. That was always surprising me. Hey, can you sign a copy? I was like, oh. And I tell people, I'm like, hey, it's worth $0.25 more at the garage sale with a signature when you go to pawn it off.
I always told him that my signature devalues the book.
Yeah, don't mar up the cover.
But Amazon and Book Baby and Barnes & Noble is also available through using a Kindle and a Nook.
Awesome.
So they can get it digitally as well. And I'm thinking about how I want to do this, put it in audio version. And so you and I need to talk and figure that out. And so I'd like to make that available, because there's people who've come to me and said, the words are too small. I'd love to read it, but there's older folks that
they just
don't have it in big print.
I'm with what we do exercise wise. I walk a couple miles every night. I listen to audiobooks every night because at a certain point I listen to podcasts and audiobooks, because you can only listen to music before you're just the same albums over and over. So it can be really helpful. But anything you want to give before we sign off here?
I just want people to do hard things. I want people to step out of their comfort zone. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but take a chance on yourself. You're not trusting yourself. You're trusting God that you're being led in the right direction, and you're going to find that it's not just heartfelt for you, but it's heartfelt for others who will need to hear your story.
Absolutely. I think Do Hard Things might be a great podcast. Maybe that'll be the next one.
That might be the next thing we do.
Awesome talking with you, man.
You too. Loved it.